Saltzman. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Brookline, the Town Meeting Members Association, and the Brookline Neighborhood Alliance, I'd like to welcome you all to the forum on warrant articles. This forum comes on the heels of our recent local elections, as you all know. Turnout was, as is often the case for those types of elections, not overwhelming. That prompted another round of should Brookline become a city discussions that many of you have probably heard before. As you know, Framingham recently decided to become a city. This leaves Brookline as the largest town in the United States. Now, arguments in favor of becoming a city in Brookline here often include the benefits such as more accountability and faster decision-making. You hear that a lot. Some argued, again, in the aftermath of our elections, that we might see greater involvement here in Brookline if we were a city. I don't know if any of this would hold true in Brookline, but here's what I do know. In planning events like this one, I encounter so many devoted citizens of this town. At every turn, I see, it's amazing the work that I see here. 5 of those people are here tonight that are going to be presenting. George Cole, co-chair of the Building Commission, will tell us about the appropriation of $1.85 million for the schematic design of the high school expansion. Town meeting member Neil Gordon and newly elected Board of Selectmen member Heather Hamilton will debate how we should publicize the town meeting warrant. Neil will also inform us about some suggested changes to Brookline's rules on campaign financing and disclosures for campaign financing. The town meeting member Janice Kahn, along with school committee chair David Pollock, will examine the merits of allocating $1.5 million to advance the process of building the 9th school at the Baldwin site. This is an impressive slate of candidates. An impressive slate of presenters. We already had the candidates night. Each one is really dedicated, each one knowledgeable, and each one incredibly involved. We're lucky to have people like this in Brookline. They, along with so many others, are working hard to govern our town. So would Brookline be better as a city? Again, I don't know. I think things are pretty darn good here in Brookline. As America's largest town, what we have is impressive. And what we will see here tonight is a dedication and competence. And if anyone, if you take a step back and you look around, can you truly suggest that what we need here is fundamental change like that? Let's let that one simmer. It's a topic for another day. I'll hand it over to our moderator, Amelia Koch, from the League of Women Voters of Brookline. Tonight we're going to hear the discussions, we're going to hear the debate, and we will learn about these important issues that affect our town that we're going to vote on next week at town meeting. Thank you very much.
I want to address the format for everybody who's here and for Neil and Heather for starting off. So each position will be allocated 2 minutes for an opening statement unless otherwise authorized in advance by the BNA coordinator. Is anybody so authorized? We'll see.
We have 12.
But authorized to go longer than 2 minutes?
10 minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we have the school, we have the 9th school, that's 10 minutes.
Okay.
We have the...
And Cole?
Yes. And
Okay.
the Baldwin site.
Okay, very good. All right. So then each position will be allocated 1 minute to respond to each question. Now tonight we're going to, the league has agreed to take cards on questions. So if you'll see up front the pink cards waving. So if you'd like to ask a question, do you want to actually hand around some cards? And the league will actually be consolidating, making sure we don't ask the same question twice, and bringing the questions forward to the moderator. So then each position will be allowed 2 minutes for a closing statement unless otherwise authorized in advance. The order of presentation follows. The pro position will go first in the opening statements, followed by the con. The moderator will designate which position will respond first to each question, alternating positions. The con position will go first in closing statements, followed by the pro. Okay, so let's begin. We have Neil Gordon and Heather Hamilton, and they are here to discuss WA10.
Hello.
And so if pro would start, that's you, Heather.
Okay. A penny saved is a penny earned. That's what my grandmother likes to remind me. Practical reasons, just so that you know what we're talking about. We're talking about Warrant Article 10, where the selectmen are moving forward a motion to not publish the warrant in its entirety in a publication, a newsprint. Ernie, pass around the example document. So practical reasons for doing this. First of all, it's $6,000 to print this each time we go to print, which is twice a year. It is very, very small type, almost impossible to read, and our lovely town staff usually take an entire week to proofread this document. It will be available to the public on our website, online. The index will still be published in a newspaper. And the constables, like Neil Gordon, usually post this for the public on a minimum of 10 public bulletin boards, but I hear that they usually post it one in each precinct. So that's 16. So I argue that we can get more bang for our buck, $6,000, $12,000 annually, if we just print the index and then post the warrant where anyone who has access can go and read it at their leisure, and it would save not only money, but also precious staff time. I'm also going to read off a few things that I found in the budget that are also around $6,000 that we could use this money towards. The selectmen services are about $6,500 in the FY18. The budget for investigation services supplies is about $10,000. Fire department's equipment maintenance capital budget is about $7,000. Utilities allocation for public safety's code enforcement office is actually about $5,000. The entire budget for the public works transportation office supplies is actually only $6,000 for the year. Public works highway road maintenance services.
Heather?
Yes.
Hi.
Oh,
Sorry?
my time?
Yep, 2 minutes is up.
Thank you.
You finish your sentence.
I have more. I'll wait for my closing.
I think your point's been well made. Neil?
All right, yes.
You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Neil Gordon, town meeting member, Precinct 1, and I'm a Brookline constable. And quoting, "To any constable of the town of Brookline, greetings. In the name of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, you are hereby required to notify and warn the inhabitants of the town of Brookline." So begins the town meeting warrant, which as a Brookline constable I posted some weeks ago in each of Brookline's 16 precincts. In addition to posting the warrant, year after year, town meeting after town meeting, the warrant's been published in its entirety in the Brookline tab. Nobody in particular noticed the cost or the effort of getting it printed until the fall of 2016. The fall warrant was an astounding 135 pages due to a slew of zoning bylaw articles. On that outlier, some feel compelled to change something we never thought was broken. Warrant Article 10 proposes removing the requirement that the town publish the complete warrant and that an index of warrant articles be published instead. Despite modern pressures, Brookline remains a New England town. We retain our citizen legislature and other elements of town government. We post physical copies of our town meeting warrants in our schools, libraries, firehouses, and some parks. People read these posted warrants, and I suspect they read the warrant posted in the tab. The notion of publishing anything less than the warrant troubles me, not deeply, but sufficient for me to be here tonight. I repeat the words of the warrant. You're hereby required to notify and warn the inhabitants of the town. Is an index sufficient warning article of a warrant article? I think not. The warrant, the complete warrant, is the only fair and adequate warning to the public, and I'm voting no action on warrant Article 10.
Any parts? Any more parts?
Good, thank you very much. Okay, this is a change. As a transition, what about a 2 to 4 inch notice in the tab referring readers to the website? Heather, you can go ahead and start with this question. I actually think it's been answered, but please go ahead.
All I'll say is that with the index of the warrant articles, our intention was to forward people to a website at the bottom of the
Very
notice.
good. And Neil, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, at great debate at the advisory committee were all sorts of alternatives with links to the town website, publishing the warrant, in a larger ad, the warrant or the index in a larger ad closer to the front. But at this point, as the moderator would say, those are outside the scope. Warrant article speaks for itself right now.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, written or verbal? Please, yes. Okay. And I do have one more question, but it's not for this discussion, so we'll hold this to the appropriate point. Yes, please.
I'm trying to orient myself to the pros and cons of this. And Heather, since you said one of the cons is the amount of staff time it takes to proof the warrant, wouldn't that be necessary anyway, whether it were presented in print or done online? Isn't that something?
And Heather, since this is directly targeted at you, I'll let you go ahead first, and then perhaps Neil would care to comment.
I'm going to quote from someone who works for the town administrator when I asked a similar question, and she wrote back, "When we placed the fall 2016 special town meeting warrant into the tab, it took 4 employees 5 days to proofread the initial 9-page proof. These pages are the full size of a Brookline tab page," which we have here, "sent to us for approval. We did this while also working on our regular day-to-day responsibilities. The proof was full of errors, which then took multiple reviews on our part, followed by multiple revisions on the tab's part before they got it perfect. Because the font was so small, we had to blow up sections of the pages so that we could actually see the written words on the page. It was painstaking. The entire process took 2 weeks from start to finish and cost just under $7,000.
Thank you, Heather. Neil, care to comment?
Yeah, so the nearly $7,000 warrant, that was the fall of 2016, a 135-page warrant, which the town staff had to proofread. That's not the typical warrant. I posted that warrant in every Brookline precinct. I could barely get the pushpins through it. That's not what we post. What we typically post is a $1,500 to $2,000 warrant that's printed in the tab. And it takes not all of that staff time. It takes some staff time. It's not, as I said, $6,000. It's not all of those items that are $6,000. The typical cost is in the $3,000 range annually for transparency and disclosure.
Can I rebut?
You know, you're going to have a rebuttal at the end. I've got one more question, and actually this is 2 people asking very similar questions. What percent of Brookline residents have access to the internet, and what about people who don't have computers or are elderly? So, Neil, we'll begin with you.
So, I'll concede that most do have access to the internet, one way or the other, but we know that not all do. There's a question that comes up routinely about distribution to town meeting members of the town budget and of the combined reports of selectmen and advisory committee, which are mailed to town meeting members. We talk about eliminating that mailing because it's expensive, and invariably there are town meeting members who say, but I don't have email and I don't have access to the internet. There are outliers who just don't have access and ought not be cut off.
Thank you. Heather.
The question was about the elderly.
The question is about the elderly and those who,
Without
as
computers.
Neil just described, others in the town who might not have internet access, even intentionally.
I would say that we're still going to proceed with posting in various public bulletin boards, so you would still have access to the warrant in its entirety, and it might actually be readable. This print is incredibly small, so if you're struggling with a computer, I would imagine that this is not exactly an accessible format either. So there are various ways to get it. You can always request a copy. You can go to these public bulletin boards, and the index will be printed in the paper so you at least can narrow down what you want to focus on.
Very good. And I see we have a couple more questions. Okay, I'm going to start back over here. And if you would just say who you are.
Yeah, Miriam Ashkenazi. I'm a new town meeting member from Precinct 13. And even though I am carrying around paper copies of the warrant articles, And I do think that I want to say a statement, which is I think you also keep in mind that there are public access computers at the library, so people can also go to the library and access online materials. But the question I have is moving the warrants to online. Is there going to be a way to track how many clicks? So who is actually looking at that? What kind of traffic is that getting? So I think that's also useful for future decisions about whether to maintain it there or whether to then go back to putting it in the tab.
And Heather, we'll begin with you.
Okay. What you're referring to is analytics on a web page, and I don't know whether or not Brookline has that. I would imagine that they do. It's something that is now kind of built into a lot of browsers. And I agree. It would be helpful for us to kind of know, like, what are the types of populations that are going to our website and downloading the information, so that when we have to post related things like public meetings about schools, we can maybe target our efforts.
Neil.
So sure, I do know that the town collects that data. As you can imagine, there are a lot of web pages. Every document that the town publishes has a separate page. It's collected. It's not all published. It's not all analyzed, but it's available. I assure you that if anybody suggested that we not post the warrant online and not make it available electronically, I'd be in the same position saying, no, you can't do that.
Thank you. Okay, and I believe we have one. Yes, please.
Yeah, I was surprised to hear about all the problems involved in translating it from what's already a digital copy to the newsprint and the amount of proofreading. I would think there must be some way of doing it so that it's error-free, whether it be via some kind of photocopy or just creating another electronic document that has everything in smaller size, many pages per page. Has that been discussed?
The staff person who emailed me said that she gave the tab many different opportunities that she saw for tweaking this process, and they have not exactly been receptive. I'm sure that they are short-staffed on their end, and they're probably working with a different software product. So it's not as straightforward as just sending a file. That's my understanding.
Well, I guess I'm wondering if someone in IT could create something that's kind of newsprint ready, just a thought.
So it's a good question. Maybe they can within the IT department. I know that it's a software issue and a software problem. The warrant, because we deal with a lot of bylaw changes, has a lot of boldface type in warrant articles and strike-throughs that don't translate into different software packages.
Very good. Okay, I'll add one more.
Hey, Raul Fernandez, new town meeting member from Precinct 9.
That's like a trend I'm hearing.
Getting involved. Our sort of opening appearance, sorry, your name. Dan mentioned the sort of low turnout per usual in town meeting election. I'm wondering if but one of the ways we can sort of by saving this money is be able to put that toward, I mean, your goal, Neil, seems to be to get more people involved in the process by being able to read these warrant articles and make informed decisions when it comes to issues that affect them. Could we better spend this money getting more people involved in actually knowing what's going on in the town and getting involved in the town election and maybe putting some efforts toward that?
Interesting question. Neil?
I think it's a great discussion, and I think the discussion that we weren't able to have because of the scope of the warrant article is how might we otherwise use that money towards the same purpose? That's a really good question. One of the things you're going to learn when you're not quite as new a town meeting member, starting next Tuesday, is that the scope of the warrant, right? What's in the warrant is what's in the warrant, and a lot of new ideas come up. and they're all fair game, just not for this town meeting.
Thank you. Heather?
I believe you're kind of making my point for me. I do believe that this is a discussion about principle, like whether or not we want to acknowledge that technology has changed, and that when you say that there's a burden for us to publicize to the citizens, is that really is it the best way to do that by still going to the newspaper? I don't reach for a hard copy. I go online. So I think that is the main communication for a lot of people who are now looking to get more involved, and we need to embrace that.
All right. I think it's time for closing arguments, and each position has 2 minutes for closing statements, and the pro position will go, for the closing, the con position will go first in closing statements. Neil, that would be you.
Thank you very much. So,
And keep an eye on our wonderful timer, Lee Cook-Childs.
I'll do that. Thank you. So last night, the advisory committee again discussed Warrant Article 10, and more specifically, they discussed this: whether the town would only publish the warrant index, and if they're only going to publish the index, shouldn't it at least be published prominently, right? Perhaps an ad in the front of the tab with the index, rather than the small print in the legal notices section. The selectmen, though, through last night, have objected to publishing the index, quote, prominently, unquote, and in the selectmen's last version of Article 10 that I've seen, contrary to the one approved by the advisory committee, they strike the word so that it won't be necessarily published prominently. There's a common refrain in Brookline and in many other towns when contentious issues arise and are decided by selectmen, school committees, or town meeting, and we hear it here, and I've heard it in other towns. We didn't know. When were the meetings? Why didn't anyone tell us? The issues presented in Article 10 remain straightforward. On one side of the argument, we save a few dollars and we save some staff time. On the other side, on my side, and on the side that's backed by Brookline PACs, we want to read, this is about 4 or 5, just to let her know.
There's no
Yeah, there's no opposing side. So do I. Yeah, I understand. It was cleared. Who knew? Linda Roseman knew. Dan will clear it. Sure.
Yeah.
4 minutes, at the most. Thank you.
Well, let's ask Dan. Do you want to ask Dan? Why don't you ask Dan? Yeah.
There's opposition to the campaign finance warrant. You passed it unanimously. You can comment if you want. Just don't make any statements.
Instant rematch.
Yeah, for everybody, expanding it to everybody. Cutting back on a little bit of, it passed 5-0 by the select. You can't vote against this.
I'm not voting against it. I'm just playing devil's advocate. Okay.
So, Neil, you're the proponent, correct? You're in
I am.
favor of...
I am.
You are, of Warrant 11.
I'm the petitioner.
You're the petitioner of Warrant 11. Okay, excellent. Okay. Excuse me?
Who's getting what? How much time?
Dan?
I just need like 1 minute.
Okay.
Wonderful. Okay, Neil, you have your 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you again. I'm still Neil Gordon from Precinct 1, different water article. I'm also the go-to guy in Brookline when it comes to campaign finance reporting. I serve as treasurer for 3 campaign finance committees, and I served as treasurer for the Vote Yes for Brookline ballot question committee. I'm the petitioner of Warrant Article 11, a bylaw change that would expand campaign finance reporting and transparency on the one hand and streamline it on the other. So a bit of background. Under Massachusetts law, candidates for townwide office are required to file periodic reports, which for the most part means public disclosure of money raised and money spent. So reports are filed by state mandate 8 days before an election, 30 days after, and at year end. But for selectmen candidates, our current bylaw goes further. It requires Brookline campaign finance report 15 days before an election, so 2 weeks before, a week earlier than the state mandated filing. Warrant Article 11 would broaden that 1 week earlier requirement to include not only selectmen candidates, but all candidates for townwide office and ballot question committees. The extra week will provide the public with important campaign finance information early enough to respond, perhaps with a mailing or campaign material, a letter to the tab, an email or social media campaign. Brookline's bylaws also require from selectmen candidates some more detail than the state mandate, and that detail is a somewhat burdensome filing of separate campaign finance reports, not only 2 weeks before an election, but 8 days before, 30 days after, and at year end. There is this parallel reporting. In every report, donors' names and addresses are listed for any donation over $50. On the town report, the total number of contributions under $50 is shown. Interesting but not compelling information. On the state report, occupation and employer is shown for donations $200 and up. For the separate town report, that trigger is over $50. That's the only difference in the state and the town reporting. So for that marginal information, occupation and employer, between $50 and $200, nearly all of which can be found on a Google search, I found, the subject parties are required to file 3, mostly redundant, parallel campaign finance reports 8 days before an election, 30 days after, and at year end. And it gets further complicated because the starting and ending periods of those reports are not necessarily the same. So the accounting just becomes cumbersome. In the interest of timely disclosure and transparency, Article 11 expands the 1 week earlier disclosure requirement from just selectmen candidates to all townwide office candidates and ballot question committees. At the same time, I propose aligning the disclosure thresholds to the mandated state amount, streamlining reporting that would have been further complicated by adding 7 additional townwide offices to the mix, and I think that's a fair trade.
All right, thank you very much. Heather, you have up to 2 minutes.
Well, full disclosure, the selectmen did unanimously move favorable action. But if somebody was going to take an opposing side, one of the things that I learned this year by running for selectmen, you know what else you can do with $6,000? Buy a lot of signs. So I had a heck of a time trying to find a treasurer. And you know why? Because of all of the filing requirements. So you expand that to library trustee and school committee race. I mean, you're kind of the only guy in town. Just saying. So just want us to take a pause and realize that when you want to run for something like this, and then you have to disclose and try to find a treasurer who's going to sign on the dotted line and take a hit if anything should go wrong, it might dissuade some people from jumping into the race. And is that what we really want?
Thank you very much.
Can I respond to that?
In the spirit of the debate, let's see if we can engage our group here and see if you get in a question that you like that and you can give an answer to it. Are there questions from the group, from the audience, either by card or?
Cards.
Please. Could you speak up?
Neil, could you please respond to
Thank you for the softball. So the other candidates for townwide office, constables, school committee members, housing authority members, library trustees, They're all subject to campaign finance reporting now. If they raise money and have a campaign finance committee, they're subject to the state mandate. They have to report 8 days before an election, 30 days after, and at year end. And if they're lucky enough to be elected, then they have to file every year. There's no election for them. But they still have an annual reporting. The Warrant Article 11 only proposes that they file one additional report in the same format as the state report in the same amount, so the accounting is not very difficult. It just requires one more report 2 weeks before the election in addition to the first filing, which is the state report 1 week prior to the election. If you can't get a treasurer for the other three, the one additional is not going to make a difference.
You say that now, but in a week leading up to a pivotal election, lots of stuff is going on. That's my rebuttal.
Okay, all right. Closing statements. Are we ready? And let's see. For closing statements, the con position will go first.
Oh.
Heather?
Good luck, Heather.
You have up to 2 minutes.
I won't take that. But, I mean, so four reports? Really? Wow, that's a lot. Find a good treasurer, because 4 reports is 4 opportunities to make mistakes. And so we're expanding this from selectmen to library trustees, constables, housing authority, school committee, and all of the ballot question committees. Have you checked with town staff about overseeing all of this new paperwork? Okay.
Is that a question?
Yeah.
I'll answer it when it's my time.
I'm done.
Okay, so yes, of course, I had a conversation with the town clerk before I filed my my warrant article. One of the reasons that I align the disclosure to the state mandate is because that separate reporting is one of the things that causes endless grief for Pat Ward. He's chasing reports because they need to be filed twice. Candidates, selectmen candidates, either miss the first filing sometimes, but when they get to the 8 day before, 30 day after year-end report, they don't realize they have to file a separate report also, and he chases them. In the same format, right, there's no longer a separate report because there's no additional information for the 8 day, 30 day after and year-end report. It's one additional report. Yes, it's additional work for the campaigns. It is a little bit more work for the town clerk. He's okay with it, which surprised me a little bit. But if we look at, in a race that's not competitive, where candidates are not raising money, you take the form, you put a big 0 through everything, and you sign it, and you're done. On the other hand, the last override ballot question, 2 sides spent about $50,000 fighting. And the first report we saw of who was donating money to those campaigns was just a week before the election. I think 2 weeks is worth it. I think 2 weeks is worth it in competitive school committee races. In the other races, to the extent they're not competitive and there's not a lot of money raised, the reporting is somewhere between modest to nil. I think it's a fair trade.
Wonderful. Thank you both very much. And if we could, we're now having a presentation on the schematic design for Brookline High School from George Cole.
Good evening. My name is George Cole. Sure. If you can't see the screen, I'd encourage you to move into a seat that you can see the screen, because my presentation is much more understandable with the visuals. Anyway, I'm going to start. My name is George Cole. I'm a member of the Brookline Building Commission and have been since the mid-90s. But I'm also serving as a co-chair of the Brookline High School Expansion Committee. And it's in that capacity that I'm here tonight to talk to you. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the Brookline High School expansion. And I'm going to cover why it's felt that expansion of the high school is necessary, how the options for expansion were determined and evaluated, what option is being proposed to investigate further, and the ask. What are we looking for from the town, and how will it be spent? So why is there a need to expand Brookline High School? And these slides are right from the school committee and school administrative staff. But basically, our high school enrollment is expanding dramatically. This is because the classes entering the Brookline High School system have expanded dramatically. Currently, there are about 1,900 to 2,000 students at the high school. They're projecting classes of somewhere between 2,600 and 2,800 within the next 6 years. Right now, the enrollment is about 2,000 students. They're projecting 2,400 by 2021, when a new expanded high school could be delivered. Longer term, it could go up as high as 2,500 or 2,600. Why is this? Because the entering classes are much larger. They used to be average, in the low 500s, mid 500s. Now they're averaging in the mid 600s. So 100 students additional equals about 5 classrooms. So this chart shows the enrollment and projected enrollment going forward. Today, in 2016, we're about 2,000. When Old Lincoln becomes available after it's vacated for the after the Devotion renovation, enrollment's projected to be about 2,100. At the early possible completion of the high school expansion, we'll be at about roughly 2,400, and we're projecting a maximum in 2024 of roughly 2,600. So what happens if Brookline High School doesn't expand? And again, I'm not on the school committee nor in the school administration, but the high school was last renovated in the mid-90s. It's perfectly functional. There are aspects of the school that are no longer really up to standards, such as science facilities and the athletic facilities are truly tired. But additionally, we just need more space to accommodate the kids. We've taken over every available space in the building for students and classroom expansion. There simply just isn't enough space. So this is how. How did we look at the options for expansion, and how were they evaluated? There was, in the Brookline tradition, a committee formed from lots of different groups representing neighbors, parents, a student representative, the school administration, the building commission on which I sit, and the selectmen. And we had lots of meetings. We developed design alternatives with our architect, HMFH, in January through March. In March, we looked at those alternatives and presented them to the community. In April, we selected a preferred design, and we finalized that, and in May, we're proposing that alternative to town meeting for funding of schematic design. So, again, lots of meetings. All these were public meetings, publicly noticed, and we met with Parks and Rec, the Building Commission, Transportation, Preservation, and Advisory Committee. Importantly, we met frequently with the neighborhood, because this neighborhood, the neighborhood around the high school will be significantly affected by any expansion of the high school. So this was the essentially the scope of the study, and I just want to point out a few things. We primarily focused on land that was owned by the town. This is the Cypress Field, the existing BHS, Tappan Gymnasium, the UAB. The town also owns a site across the green line from the Tappan Gym, and it's on those sites that we focused our initial studies. We also thought about looking outside the box, and we literally looked at a potential adjacent sites on Lowell Road and Welland Road until we were told over our dead bodies that would be a possibility. We also looked at 111 Cypress Street, which is not a property owned by the town. It has been studied by the town as a potential site for expansion. It's currently being permitted as a 40B residential project, and we were asked to look also at that site. So this represents a very condensed report on a lot of work, but basically we studied three options, and the three options were small, medium, and large. The first option was just accommodate the kids. The second option was bring up the high school to current educational standards as defined by the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority. The third was the dream version, give us everything we could ever possibly want. And option one was basically an expansion of the existing high school building, a projected project cost of roughly $180 million. These are big numbers. Option two further expanded the high school and renovated Tappan Gym. These options ranged from low 200 millions to $270 million. Again, sort of breathtaking. The third option was everything you could ever want and more. That option was coming in anywhere between $350 and $400 million. Again, breathtaking. We then looked at the option of building what's come to call the ninth grade academy. And this is a separate 120,000 square foot building on 111 Cypress Street. And this would be combined with the renovation of science facilities within the high school. And these options, which we called 4A and 4B, the difference between 4A and 4B is you have a larger addition to the high school for science. These were coming in at about $105 million to $130 million. Option 4C and D are the same, except we're projecting expanding that building on Cypress over the MBTA tracks, which are immediately adjacent to 111 Cypress. There's a lot of advantage to doing that. We understand how difficult it is to work with the MBTA, and we're exploring this option with that in mind. Those options range in cost from $110 to $135, $136 million. So what option is being proposed to investigate further? The building committee unanimously recommended option 4D. There's general agreement that 4D represented the best solution, balancing the need for expansion, the educational imperatives, the need for the needs of the adjacent neighborhoods and financial prudence. Option B is a fallback if we can't come to an agreement with the MBTA. So this is a rendering of that option. Again, these are cartoons. These represent massing diagrams. These do not represent specific buildings or designs. So the ask, what are we looking for? We're looking for $1.85 million. That really is to pay the architects and engineers for schematic design so that we can bring to town meeting a fully vetted building and costs. Within that number are design fees for the 111 Cypress building, expanded science facilities within the high school, and a renovated tap and gym complex. Additionally, there's due diligence by environmental and geotechnical engineers and traffic engineers. So if we're funded, the schedule would look like this, and we'd, in the fall of 2017 to winter of 2018, we'd complete schematic design, we'd finalize project costs, we'd have public presentations in the spring. 2018, we'd go for a debt exclusion override. At that point, we'd know the scope of the project and its costs. In the fall of 2019, we would have a groundbreaking and complete the building in roughly 2 years for a occupancy in the fall of 2021. That's my presentation. I welcome comments or questions, so please ask them. Yes?
Does the town own 111 Cypress Street?
No, it would be taken, it would be a taking, eminent domain taking. And the numbers I showed you for any of the options labeled 4A to D, 4A to D, do not include the cost of that acquisition.
What's that, do you have a rough estimate about?
I do, but I can't say it. It still made a lot of financial sense to pursue this route, even with that included in the number. Yes?
So I have two questions, really. The first question is just to clarify. I think that you said right at the end there that 4D and I assume 4B also include the tap and gym renovation.
Correct.
Okay. My question is this idea of a 9th grade academy. In full disclosure, I have a current 4th grader. So this is really important for this is personal, right? In terms of a 9th grade academy, there are extra costs to that in terms of staffing and how do you approach 9th graders different from 10th, 11th, 12th. Is that considered in this budget? Or
No, this is only a capital budget.
Okay.
This is not an operational cost budget.
I do like the idea of this thing.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Right, we have a number of new town meeting members, so I wonder if you could explain debt exclusion override?
No, I cannot. I'm not able to. I just, I'm building.
You got money.
I'm a buildings guy.
Oh, I understand. So I'm sure 10 people in the audience are going to handle it. Mr. Money. All right.
Okay,
Come on, Mr. Money.
Mr. Money. There are two kinds of overrides. One is, I'm Neil Wyshensky. I'm the chair of the Board of Selectmen. Two kinds of overrides. One is an operating override where you permanently raise the tax levy. You would use that to pay for teachers and some of the things we've been talking about operating in the high school and any of the schools. The other kind of override is a debt exclusion override where you would be passing an override for a specific project. So, for example, with the high school, we would be passing an override with the express purpose of paying for the debt and interest for the high school, and then once the high school is paid off, that tax levy goes away. I believe it's either this year or next year, the tax levy for the 1990s high school renovation will have been paid off. We, 2 or 3 years ago, paid off the Lincoln School override. So they kind of wind down, just kind of like a mortgage, and over time they'll disappear. We're about to get the effects of the devotion school override. We remember was it last year, 2 years ago? 3 years ago, we passed an override for the devotion school. That is just starting to kick in now, and then we'll be paying for that for the next 25 years.
Great.
You.
Yeah, has there been any decision made on parking?
No, there has not been a decision made on parking.
I know that they were talking about possibly going under Cypress Field.
And I think there are significant negative reactions to that
The
proposal.
other option is parking in the neighborhood, just as they do now.
Yes, sir.
If you have the renovation of the Tappan Street gym on your radar, what's going to substitute for athletic facilities while the renovation of that facility is taking place? I mean, there isn't, as far as I know, another facility like that in the immediate vicinity of the high school. And if you shut that down, what happens?
That's an excellent question. And, we haven't gotten that far. What I do know is the Tappan was not renovated in the last round in the mid-90s. It's really tired. And it really does need updating. I think we'd look at a summer slammer, which is doing all the work in 4 months. We'd also look at phased renovations so that part of it could be used while part of it was under renovation. But we just haven't gotten that far in our planning. Any other questions? Yes?
This is a program question, maybe outside your purview, but I'm wondering if you could explain the concept, ninth grade academy.
No, I can't. I'm not an educator. All I do know that the school department and the school committee are very enthusiastic about this concept. They feel pedagogically it is really a good thing, a very positive thing. It's not like it's being imposed on them and they're accepting it reluctantly because we happen to be building a separate building. They feel that pedagogically it is a very positive thing, but I can't speak anything further to it.
A little bit of the reasoning is that, I don't know their reasoning, I know the reasoning about separating ninth graders from 10, 11, and 12 graders, which is they're not quite ready yet. And so actually, especially as you're bringing all these kids in from all different schools, you take a lot of the pressures out that come from the older kids in terms of peer pressure. And so that's why these like separate ninth grades are a very interesting way to look at the developmentally meeting the kids where they are, rather than throwing them into a population with much older kids that all know each other. And then you get a lot of this, you get a lot of emotional baggage from that.
The other thing, if I may say, my daughter was in the ninth grade many years ago when the old Tappan was converted from a swing school. This is when the high school was being renovated.
Right, and they used Lincoln as a ninth grade school.
And I think there's quite a difference between then and now. It was done in such a way, and I taught in Newton for 40 years, so there's always an issue when you build things, but you don't provide funds or training for that transition, and you don't support the principals or the teachers, and it's a real problem. And I think it was uneven. It was uneven precisely because the building needed work, and they'd done what they could in the time available. This is going to be quite different. The building now has been upgraded because the upper Devo is there. It's got lots of good things going for it. And I think they've got a better sense, the school department and the teachers, about how to use that space, which they really didn't have, 20 years ago. The other thing is, I think, just what my colleague has said, and that is pedagogically, we have a much better sense of how that transition has been handled in other schools that are similar, but are going through quite the kinds of difficulties that we're doing. So to bring a whole town together, and let the kids make a cohort out of that, really has some tremendous advantages. And I think also, from speaking as a teacher, when you do, this is Brookline, so people like to, they invent things, they're quite creative. And this really will draw members of the teaching staff who absolutely want to make this thing happen.
So I do want to just call us back to the purpose of this particular discussion, because we're really concerned about a relatively small amount of money meant to help us take the next steps in terms of exploration. This is clearly a fascinating topic, and so I encourage you all to attend other meetings that are going to be available.
And there's an
on it.
enormous amount of information on the school department's website about the BHS expansion project and all the iterations and options that we've looked at, and I encourage you to go to that website.
And in addition, we now have another very meaty topic, a discussion of the Baldwin School renovations. And to that end, we have another presentation. So will our presenter please come forward? Here we come. I don't have a limit to the time, but I will, there's a pro and a con of what we've done, so.
Yes, sir.
There's going to be great interest and there's going to be rigorous debate. Please feel free to take the time. But I do appreciate your
No, don't do that. Sorry. One second. It's another, yeah, but I'm just getting ready. If you want to start. Yeah, so in the interest of time, let me just start out. I've been asked to introduce myself. So I'm David Pollack. As of 2 weeks ago tomorrow, I am the chair of the Brookline School Committee. I was elected in 2013, and so I've served 4 years on the school committee. The previous year to the one we're starting now, I was vice chair, so I got to train a little bit, had some training wheels. And then for the past 3 years, I've been chair of the school committee's capital improvements subcommittee. Prior to running for school committee in 2013, I served on the town's building commission, which George serves on, so I served with George on the building commission for 8 years. And and that service was because I'm an architect, and in my practice, most of my clients are cities and towns and public housing authorities in eastern Massachusetts. So it's that expertise that puts me front and center in all these important capital projects that we're building. But then also, I have taught at Roger Williams University and Rhode Island School of Design. And I served on the Brookline Education Foundation board for 10 years. So I have an education, that's by way of background. In addition to being chair of the school committee now, I am also one of the 3 co-chairs of the 9th Elementary School at Baldwin Building Committee. And that committee was structured the same way the High School Expansion Building Committee was structured, to have a chair from the Board of Selectmen, who is now Neil Wyszynski, but he just picked that up as of the election, a chair from the Building Commission, and that's Janet Fearman, the chair of the Building Commission, and myself. So really what I want to do is show you what the 9th School Building Committee, along with staff and the consulting architects and their whole teams, the consulting architects, JLA, Jonathan Levy Architects, have been doing for approximately the last 6 months since the building committee started work back in November, which is doing the feasibility phase design for an elementary school at the Baldwin site. So is there a laser pointer here? Oh, well, maybe I did, that won't show on television anyway. At any rate, this is the school, this is the Baldwin site, this is the Baldwin School building here, and then this street across the top is Heath Street. Over on the left, this is Hammond Street. Boylston Street, Route 9 is running left to right, just off the frame, and then, whoops. There we go. And then Sewell Recreation Center is all the big soccer fields that you see in the middle. So this is Sewell Rec. The lower field, here's the recreation center, here's the cinder block gym, and this is the Sewell field. And then this, above the Sewell field, this is the upper parking lot, an unpaved lot, which is the subject of a lot of interest around this site because that's where the expanded parking is proposed that would serve both recreation and the school in a dual use or shared use. So here's a drawing that shows the existing condition. The red line outlines the Baldwin School property. You'll see at the left of the red property there's tennis courts. That's a piece of property of interest because it's subject to a grant from the federal Land and Water Conservation, and so is restricted. There's also been recent correspondence that raises an issue about whether the playground, the open space to the right of it is restricted, and that is subject of legal consideration and counsel, and that's what the reserve fund transfer that the advisory committee voted the other day is to hire, for town council to hire expert counsel to start to advise on that and other issues. And this slide seems to be cut off because there's some notes over on the right that are missing, but let's just keep going. That's the existing condition. So here's a drawing of all of the improvements. And what I want to briefly talk about is the recreation improvements. And the improvements to Sewell Recreation are responsive to the requests of Aaron Galantine, the Parks and Recreation Director, and Lisa Paradis, the Recreation Director, and that board in large part. And I think that there's a lot of enthusiasm about the recreation improvements, which include enlarging the large soccer field over on the right, making the entire site handicap accessible, replacing the old uninsulated cinder block gym with a new recreation gym that will belong to the recreation department, which is, if I can get the mouse going again, this is the rec gym, but it's attached to the school gym so that, again, schools operate 180 days out of the year. It leaves 185 days out of the year for recreation to not only use its gym, but to expand and program into the school gym. And public bathrooms, a new replacement of their current environmental classroom. So those improvements to recreation facilities, I haven't heard a lot of objection to. And the concern is really about the enlarged, that I've heard objections to, of course, is the enlarged parking lot, which is the site of what was the mansion that was removed. So what I'm going to do now, here's the roof plan of the building. You can see at the very bottom, there's a little square that goes across a line. That's the rec gym, which is on Sewell property, and the rest of it is on the Baldwin property. But if you could just queue up, these plans were presented to the building committee yesterday morning, and just since yesterday morning, we asked Jonathan Levy to make us a little narrated loop. So this is kind of 1.0. We haven't given him any feedback on this, but this will give you an introduction to the building.
And it's a premiere. This is a premiere.
This is world premiere of this film, right at this moment.
This is Jonathan Levy, the architect for Brookline's new 9th elementary school. This is a short video which you can stop at any moment to see more detail, which I prepared at the request of the town's hardworking committee chairs. The site consists of two parts, the Sewell Recreation Center and the school site proper. These will interact beautifully, supporting one another's activities. You can see in this aerial view the three-part division of the school reflecting the district's educational plan and Superintendent Bott's vision of a school in three rather than two parts for K through 8. At the northernmost end is the pre-K through 2 or lower school with its playground. What we're going to do now is shift around the east side of the school, showing how well it fits into the neighborhood. In fact, it meets the existing zoning regulations and is divided into pieces that then reflect the scale and shape of the adjoining residential buildings. This is the south portion of the building, which will serve as the entrance from the new shared parking and drop-off with the Sewell Recreation Center. Now we're going to look inside at the second floor entry level. It's a split level scheme where you enter at the second floor into a lobby with the administration, guidance, and the media center very prominent. And as we move into the building, there are stairs down to the Learning Commons, which I'll describe in a moment. A balcony, kind of like a main street, connects the various neighborhoods, learning communities within the school. Each balcony has some project space with soft seating and places for the students to hang out and collaborate in the way of our 21st century learning. In the northern portion of the building are the younger kids, and here you're looking at the kindergarten classrooms. And they have their very own smaller learning commons with project areas and a set of story steps that connect up from the pre-kindergarten level to the kindergarten level with its playground structures. Each learning community has its own teacher's workspace, which is highly visible to where the student collaboration spaces are. Now we're going to go down to the first level, which opens directly out onto the beautiful oak trees at Oak Street. And you can see here the combination use of cafeteria, learning commons, and also the way it all works together with the auditorium or multi-use space and the small atrium learning commons for the younger kids. Now going up to the third level is the clearest indication of the three learning communities, each one with its own project space opening onto a terrace rooftop outdoor classroom. Here we're zooming in there, and the stairs connecting up from the lower levels to connect each learning community with itself. Here's the learning community for the grades 3 through 5, and then finally the middle school, which is at levels 3 and 4, with its cluster of classrooms, its very prominent science classroom. Now we're going to look at this in a slightly different way, just to give you another perspective, looking at the lower school, pre-K through 2, and its learning commons and classrooms with access to grade both at the first and second level, and then combining that with the elementary school, grades 3 through 5 on the right, with the shared learning commons between those two, and then finally adding the middle school on the right with the main learning commons. My purpose here is to illustrate how this site and building will nurture and inspire learning and teaching for our century in ways that couldn't have been imagined just a few years ago, in order to advance and secure Brookline's historically well-earned reputation for excellence. Thank you.
Great. So just a reminder that what we're discussing is a 1.5 appropriation for schematic design of the Baldwin School. And we're going to have Janice Kahn and David Pollock. So, yep, please. As our pro and our con. And I think we've had
Appropriately con.
Great.
Yeah, what it looks like in terms of the overall, yeah, where is it? Thank you, that's great.
Yep, there you go.
Thank you, that's great.
So a reminder to our participants that we are going to, we're going to have opening statements, and I believe the pro has already had their extended opening statement, so we'll move to the con position. And then there'll be questions, and you'll have 1 minute to answer, and each of you will answer, and we'll alternate unless there's a directed question at one of you in particular. And then we'll have closing, in which the con position will go first, and that will also be 2 minutes. So let's begin. Janice, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement position.
Okay. I didn't prepare as an opening. I was told that I would have, because David Pollock was presenting in a longer framework, that I would be able to just speak in a longer way as well. And so my remarks
I'm
are,
getting a nod from
yes,
from
yes,
Dan,
that is
and
the
so
case.
please,
Thank you for the
please do.
confirmation. So thank you all for being here and for watching wherever you are. My name is Janice Kahn. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 15. I'm also a member of the advisory committee. And I'm also, I also am a resident in a buffer zone that would be reassigned to the Baldwin School if it was built. And my children went to Baker. The current children on the street go to Heath. And so I come to this discussion with three very important perspectives. That of the neighborhood, that of the precinct, and that of the whole town. And I think all of those perspectives are equally important and deserving of certainly town meeting's attention. And I'd say that last month we had our neighborhood association meeting, and my neighborhood unanimously opposes this school, not on the basis of its design, because I think that it's been demonstrated it's actually quite a nice design. The reason for the opposition is that this will be the only school in all of Brookline that parents will not be able to walk their children into. That Pierce has an 81% walkability rating. This will have at most a 5%. And parents of very young children feel that the ability to walk their kindergartners into a school and talk to a teacher is important, and they value that more than a building. So just to say that. So everyone has an opinion on the night school. I would be lying if I would say that I did not have an opinion on the night school, and I think that would be true for almost everybody at this point. But it also seems to me that few of the opinions are based on fact. And so I'd like to correct some perhaps misconceptions and realign the discussion with those facts. So here goes. So for that, we need to rewind the clock back to October 13th, 2016, when the Board of Selectmen and School Committee voted on the ninth school. At that point in time, there were three options on the table: one in North Brookline, one in South Brookline, and one in Chestnut Hill, a block in from Route 9. The facts that would inform this vote were on a matrix developed by the same architect who's developing now these plans that you've seen, JLA. And based on that matrix, only one of the three sites was given a green light, and that was the Baker School, which was one of the neighborhoods with pressing enrollment needs. It had 11 acres of land without any land use restrictions, and JLA wrote that they could even improve the transportation issues on Beverly Road, which were of real concern to this neighborhood. And having my children went to Baker School, and I can attest that there are some complicating transportation issues there. So that's where the facts led, and I presume that's why the majority of the Board of Selectmen, including its chair, Neil Wyshynski, voted for Baker, and why the current chair of the school committee also voted for Baker, not just once, but twice. So one of the most compelling reasons for not choosing Baldwin and Sewell on the combined parcels was the Article 97, which was on this matrix. It was known. And those were, the town agreed to those in exchange for state funds to improve Sewell and similar protections on Baldwin for a federal grant to improve the Baldwin playground. It's absolutely right that the advisory committee approved a $50,000 reserve fund transfer to further study these issues, because the town really needs to fully understand the legal restrictions on these properties. So an amicus brief filed by Attorney General Maura Healey regarding a case currently before the SJC reconfirms the importance of Article 97 protections for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And this is the way the brief starts. Massachusetts has a long and proud tradition of protecting park and conservation lands. That tradition was enshrined as a constitutional right when the people voted to ratify Article 97. As the third most densely populated state in the nation, the Commonwealth faces the enormous challenge of protecting undeveloped park and conservation land from the ever-growing pressure to build schools, roads, and other facilities on them due to escalating land values and declining open spaces. And further in this brief, Maura Healy states that Article 97 land should not, no Article 97 land should be disposed of because of local political pressures. And I believe, everybody may not believe this, but I certainly believe that political pressures are in play on this particular ninth school decision. So there is a detailed legal procedure to follow if a town wishes to convert Article 97 land. That is possible. However, there has to exist what the Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs calls exceptional circumstances. And the first exceptional circumstance is that all other options to avoid the Article 97 disposition have been explored and no feasible and substantially equivalent alternatives exist. But the very process the town used comparing these three sites, all of which were viewed as buildable, means that bar cannot be reached. Only Baldwin had Article 97 restrictions. So the delays the town is now facing have nothing to do with potential litigation from neighbors. That's false. The delays have everything to do with state and federal laws and the fact that the Board of Selectmen and School Committee chose to ignore a January 2016 letter from Brookline Town Council outlining the legal issues with the Baldwin and Sewell properties. So that letter was written a full 9 months before the town chose Baldwin. The reality is that building a ninth school in North or South Brookline, in my view, will not solve the townwide enrollment issues. And there is talk of needing to build yet a 10th school if we build a ninth school in South Brookline. And that will also likely have no state matching funds. So we're potentially asking the residents of the town to fund devotion, which we've already passed a debt exclusion to fund, a ninth school, a high school renovation, potentially a 10th school, along with a general override in the next 2 to 3 years, which is asking, it could be as high as $500 million or $750 million from taxpayers, which is, I think, a lot to ask of property owners in Brookline. But there may be a more sensible, more cost-effective approach that could solve the school problems without driving up housing costs so much that the town becomes even less affordable. And I believe the time has come now to explore other options that do not involve Baldwin or Sewell and which will create additional classroom capacity in the parts of town where the need is greatest and where it can be done quickly. The longer we insist on a site that likely will take years of legal process to move forward, and even if it is successful, the more time and money we waste instead of meeting a need that the residents of the town view as urgent, I think is time poorly spent. So I'll just throw out an option. You know, I'm sure that many people have lots of good ideas. We are a smart and creative community. But one idea that comes to mind is expanding Baker. We're doing that at Devotion. We could do an equal expansion at Baker. It has almost twice the land that Devotion has. And that would solve South Brookline's immediate problems. And it would keep Baker a walkable neighborhood school, which this school will not do. Baker, 200 to 300 kids from Baker will be bused or driven to this school. And then we can look at Pierce, and there are a couple of options. One might be purchasing the building right next door to Pierce, which we currently rent space in. It's called Pierce Loft. It's part of the Pierce campus. Also, Pierce is due for a significant renovation, and we could think about maybe redesigning the entire Pierce building. And that could solve a lot of North Brookline's problems. So I think that we just need the political will to move in another direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. I do have one question that came into me earlier. Please hand your cards to the league members who are moving around. But I'm going to begin with money for the ninth school. What will be done with the money set aside for Baldwin planning while the investigation into the site is ongoing? Why is the amount so high? And David, let's begin with you. And you have 1 minute. Please watch the moderator, Lee Cook Child.
The $1.5 million funding request is the amount of money that the building department and the owner's project manager from our building department has determined is the correct amount to do the next phase of work, schematic design. It's also going to include some additional minor feasibility study having to do with looking at different options that might reduce the amount of parking on the Sewell property to address some of the questions that have been raised by the Parks and Recreation Commission, and also potentially to address some of the Article 97 issues that relate to the Sewell property. And none of that money will be spent according to either of the recommendations that are currently coming to town. I'm also a town meeting member. I forgot to introduce myself that way, but Precinct 11. But at any rate, both the Board of Selectmen's motion or recommendation and the school committee, the advisory committee's recommendation say that until the legal research is done, that the money won't be spent.
Janice.
I think David answered that fairly. I mean, the advisory committee would hope that we have a lot more answers before we start spending more money on plans which may in fact not be able to be built.
Okay, I have a series of excellent questions. Thank you all very much for your cards. If Baldwin is next, how do we avoid starting all over again? Janice, 1 minute for you, and then David, you're next.
Okay, well, I think I kind of sort of referred to that in my remarks. Tomorrow, you could start building at Baker. It has no land restrictions, and it was one of the more obvious choices, I think. And this is, I think, where we went wrong as a town. We only picked what one might call a nuclear option, a 4-section, 800-student school. That was the only option on the table. But that's not, in fact, what we need to do to solve our North and South Brookline problems. What we really need to do is a smaller addition at Baker and also a smaller addition at, say, Pierce, which would really relieve all the pressures, and I think we could go forward in quick succession and really meet the needs, the pressing needs the town has.
David, 1 minute.
We've been at this for almost a decade, addressing this problem, and since the very beginning we've been looking for a way to build a 9th elementary school, and there's been that much public process over all that time. And after many public meetings and much public deliberation and public input, the Board of Selectmen voted unanimously in the October meeting to support this site, and the school committee voted 6-3 to support this site. And it is in the middle of a neighborhood that is not served by a public school, and it's the project that the community has come together to, the greater Brookline community has come together to support, to address the pressing needs of the public schools.
Thank you. And David, if you would start with this question, why hasn't the golf course been more seriously considered?
It's Article 97.
It is Article 97 land. It was that question in March of 2016 was brought to the Parks and Recreation Commission. I was at that meeting. Janice was at that meeting, and the Parks and Recreation Commission essentially said that they had absolutely no interest in a school being placed. I believe I'm accurately reporting what they said, that they didn't want a school to be on any of the 120 acres of Putterham Meadows.
I could follow up a little bit with that. I think it was a little bit more complex. The golf course has tremendous drainage problems. The amount of land that would actually be available for building was quite narrow along Newton Street. But I was a member of town meeting when town meeting voted to give the golf course Article 97 protection. So once again, that is a serious issue for the town, Article 97.
Janice, beginning with you. The recent survey, there's been a recent survey apparently of current school parents showing 46% of Heath parents do not walk their students to school. Were you aware of this fact, and how does this impact your impressions of the Baldwin and importance of walkability?
I'm very glad that question was asked. This information was actually provided to the advisory committee, what's today is Wednesday, last night. And in fact, the walkability index, the range of family responses is 44 to 81%. And so in this town, even though it's only 40, I think 40-something percent is still a pretty high amount of people that can walk. As I said, to this school, the reason there is no school in this area is there are no children in this area to attend that school. Virtually every child would have to be bused or driven there. So this has almost a zero walkability index. And so I would say 40% is good.
David, 1 minute.
I don't think we have statistics, although Janice suggested a number, but I don't think we have statistics on what the walkability for this property will be. And I also don't think there are no children that live in this neighborhood. What I do know is that we need to build a school to meet the needs of all of Brookline, and it has not been in any way easy to solve this problem. We implemented Expand in Place, which was the recommendation of B-Space, and built 55 classrooms across buildings, building inside and outside. We've expanded and added the equivalent of 2 of our larger schools within our existing schools, and we need another school. And we have a plan on how to do that, and we're going to get the legal advice that we need, and then make a decision based on that legal advice on how to move forward from there.
Thank you. Starting with you, David. How can a building that is 100% auto-dependent be considered a 21st century development? Isn't it a bad precedent for the town, the Commonwealth, to work to overturn Article 97?
Well, that's two questions. Maybe I'll take the first one. Let me take the second one. Article 97...
I would prefer you took them both, right?
All right, I'm not sure I can do that in 60 seconds. But Article 97 has issues related to the Sewell Recreation Center, and to my knowledge, not to Baldwin. And it really pertains to the changes that we're doing to make a shared use parking lot, because everything else is improvements to recreation facilities on recreation land, so that's really not changing Article 97 use. And there is absolutely no knowledge to date that there is a conversion involved in this plan that is an Article 97 action that needs to go to the legislature. I think there's a reasonable conversation that when you build this much parking that needs to be addressed.
And let's add 30 seconds, if you would, timekeeper, and if you would address the first part of that question.
Well, do you want to just do one and then do the second? And Janice can talk about Article 97?
Okay.
I'd just like to clarify a statement that David just made, that changing a recreational use to school use is actually a change of use. Sewell Park right now is open to the community all the time. If it gets converted and used for school use, it will become restricted school property. And any school site is restricted during the days when the school is in session. So it is actually a change in use.
Well, I'm not sure anybody anywhere in this whole process has said that there's going to be restricted school use on Sewell Park. I mean, the parking lot, if that's what you're talking about, then I think there's a reasonable conversation. But about all of the recreation facilities, I think it's different. Can you repeat the first question?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Yeah. How can a building that is 100% auto-dependent be considered a 21st century development? So
there was a drawing that was presented, a map of the town that was presented at yesterday's building committee meeting. Maybe Ben, you could put it up, but that shows where the children. There's a group of staff in the building, not just school department staff, but also the assessor and other departments that were called an enrollment working group, and they did an enrollment projection. And so there's a map that shows where the children, according to that projection, so it's mapping that math. So it's not exact, it's not necessarily accurate, but this is what the information that we have about where the children will be in the fall of 2020, and as an approximation, but you can see this online, and the assumptions are all published in the notes there. But if you take a 3-section school which at Baldwin and a 4-section school at Baker, there will be children living south of that green line to fill up those two schools. So while I agree that transportation will be a significant part of how of getting children to the Baldwin property, if this school were to be built at Stop and Shop or anywhere in North Brookline, that same population of a 3-section school is still in South Brookline and would need to get to school. So the transportation impact in terms of sustainability of building in a location like Stop and Shop, which we call a walkable neighborhood school location, would have a very high transportation impact, because all of the children who live around Stop and Shop are already walking to Pierce or Lawrence or Devotion. So you're not actually adding children walking to school, you're busing them from South Brookline.
Either extreme will only create disruption to many, many families, which is why I feel very strongly that we need to rethink this and look at a two-part solution here. And again, I want to say that it's more than just putting kids on buses. It's the lack of parents having access to children's teachers when we have a very strong school parent community. We have a promise that families have access to teachers. This school will have no access to teachers.
Thank you, Janice. And Janice, we'll start with you for this question. Isn't it true that the quickest way to move to a new school is to move immediately to a site without restrictions?
I think that goes without saying. Yes. If you picked a site that did not have to go through a legislative process, of course, it could be built much more quickly.
David.
Well, I think it would be imprudent to assume that any such site exists.
Thank you. Next question, and David, beginning with you. If Baker was selected, why isn't that going forward? Were local residents opposed?
Baker wasn't selected. I quoted the vote earlier. This site, Baldwin site, was selected unanimously by the Board of Selectmen and by a vote of 6-3 by the school committee.
Janice?
So there were actually 3 votes that were taken that evening. And the majority of the selectmen twice voted for Baker. It was 3-2, twice for Baker. And on the school side, it was 3 members of the school committee joined with the 3 members of the Board of Selectmen. That's how we got 6. And then 8 decided to go to Baldwin, but that was only because Stop and Shop was taken off the table. Because the majority of the school committee actually supported Stop and Shop. Did I say that right? Yes.
All right. Very good. Okay, Janice, beginning with you. Can you give an example of another school that relies on parks and recs field space?
So if you recall the video that we showed, the small kids have play structures on Heath Street on a nice green up in the northeast corner, and then the larger kids on the Baldwin property, not Sewell, and then the older kids have play structures by the school on the Baldwin property at the southwest corner, and then there's more play space next to the school in fact a couple of spaces. So it isn't reliant on Sewell.
Okay.
David is pretty right. Baldwin actually right now does have children in it, and so they use the play structures there. The play structure that exists at Sewell is specifically designed for very young children because that's who is in the Sewell Recreation Program, and it's unique in the town. It's specifically designed for very young children, and it meets the needs of that Sewell playground and Sewell school. recreation program. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you both. Beginning with you, Janice. 2 recent consultants' reports recommended expand in place and not to take public land. Please comment.
Yes, well.
And cautioned not to take public land.
And caution not to take land. Yes, expand in place was, in fact, the recommendation last go-around with the school committee, and I think, as David said, that it was successful as far as it went, and then enrollments kept coming. A fun fact about Baker, a wing was added to Baker. It has 6 classrooms in it. So I think that when we talk about expanding a school, we need to really look at how we're spending our tax dollars and see that it actually makes sense. I think there's plenty of space to expand Baker. I would have been opposed to an 800-student school at that site.
Thank you. Okay.
So let me just comment briefly
Sure, yes,
on that question. This has been said in a lot of the hundreds of meetings that I've been in around this for years, but what we've done over the past decade is we've built 55 additional classrooms, but largely we haven't built all the rest of the necessary facilities to support education. And if you look at the net amount of space that classrooms take up versus all the other parts of a school, which includes guidance and cafeteria and gym and all that kind of stuff, it's a small fraction of the entirety of a school. So we really need to build an entire school. We need to build all the school facilities. And if we were to continue to expand in place and add any more classrooms at any of our existing buildings, it would likely be extremely expensive because we would have to expand all of the facilities. We'd be doing major expansion projects throughout town at multiple buildings and would not be as efficient as building one state-of-the-art new purpose-built school.
All right. Janice, I see you'd like to comment, but you're going to get another chance. So, David, this question begins with you. Can you talk about how school boundaries will change to benefit all schools in town?
There's been a lot of discussion about redistricting, about how would 9 school districts be drawn when we have 8 now, and it would be done very carefully. This piece of paper is available on the project somewhere. Ben can tell us where it is on the web. And on the reverse of it is this, which has all of the 15 criteria which previously have been used by redistricting, multi-stakeholder committees to figure out how to draw the boundaries equitably. And so that's a future process, but we did the map that, if you could flip it back to the first side, we did this map just to give people an understanding of where the populations are, not to draw the line, but to understand that, in fact, there are enough children between Chestnut Hill and South Brookline to fill these 2 schools, and so that it wouldn't be highly disruptive, the future redistricting. But anytime you change the lines, it's a careful and difficult conversation in the community.
Janice, 1 minute.
Yes. So the really pressing need right now, in my view, is North Brookline, and this school will not help North Brookline. And we don't really know the pressing needs around the Baker School, but we do know that kids that could walk to Baker, if this school was built, would suddenly find themselves on a bus. And we don't know because we don't know what Hancock Village is going to bring to the Baker School community. And, but that notwithstanding, an expansion of Baker, which is absolutely possible. We're doing wonderful things at Devotion. We could do equally wonderful things. Even a lower school at Baker could be built, not even adjacent to it, but on that same property, there's plenty of space. We could make it a very good neighborhood walkable school there, which is what that neighborhood deserves. I'm a former member of that community. It's what it deserves.
Thank you, Janice. And Janice, beginning with you, regarding school use at Sewell, isn't there a school there now?
Yes. Yes, it's run by the recreation department. It's not run by the school department. So it's not technically a school the way we consider schools. It's not a K-8 school, it's not an elementary school. These are very young children. It's a program that's specifically, it's tuitioned in, it's run by the recreation department separately, and it may even be self-supporting, although I'd have to check.
It's going to stay, nothing in the Baldwin, ninth school at Baldwin plans change the operation of that school in the Sewell Recreation Center. Indoors, it's outdoor space, it's going to continue. That's the Parks Department's program, and the school project doesn't affect it.
It will affect it because part of this plan that's no longer up there is that the current gym, which is what Sewell uses, is going to come down, and a new gym is being proposed that will have, I believe, shared use. No?
It's recreation. No, the Sewell gym that's marked there is 100% owned and programmed by recreation. And it has the added advantage, as I said earlier, of being able to utilize the school gym when the school isn't in session.
Okay. So that's a different plan now, not to tear down the Sewell gym.
No, it's right there. The box at the bottom is the new Sewell gym. It's bigger, it's better, it's insulated, it's not the old cinder block box, and by building it with an operable wall that could open up to the school gym, which is a larger gym above it, it's all about the plan of doing more of what we do throughout town, which is a close collaboration between the recreation department and the school department.
All right, next question, beginning with you, David. Didn't we already examine and exhaust all of our expand-in-place options?
Yes, and maybe I don't know if there's a nuance to that, but I talked about it earlier. The schools are all bursting at the seams. We've unbalanced so that at a couple of the buildings, the cafeterias are so small in comparison to all of the added classrooms that they have to start lunch at 10:20 and have 5 lunches. So we've got kids eating lunch at 10:20 in the morning. We have other kids who go to lunch, then they go to recess and they go home.
Thank you. Janice, do you care to comment on that question?
Yes, I believe that there is room at Baker for expansion. It has 11 acres of land. Devotion has a little over 6 acres of land. The population at Baker now is 780, I believe, in that school. Devotion is being built to 1040, I believe. I think that there is space to do something very creative and good for that community. And there's absolutely land there to support a small lower school or whatever that community would like to keep it a neighborhood school.
Janice, beginning with you, if we grow our schools to 1,000 students like Devotion will be, will that really best serve our students?
I think it's all in the design. And I think that, for instance, Pierce has, right now it's in 3 buildings. We could actually, I think, maybe look at purchasing that building. We could redesign Pierce so that it would work for a large number of students. To be fair, though, too, the enrollment statistics are not showing that we have an expanding school population any longer. And I don't know really what the future holds for us as a town and in terms of student enrollments. This year's student enrollments were lower. Kindergarten was lower. We don't know what's coming down the road. So this is our best guess, and I think that the school department is really making a good faith effort to do the best it can to predict kids that are not yet born and not yet in the town of Brookline. So, but I'm not totally convinced that we will end up with all 1,000 student schools in the town. Heath is way below that.
Thank you. David?
The enrollment report that I commend it to you, it's available on the website, came out like 6 weeks ago. It's gotten kind of rave reviews from wonks across town, math wonks and stuff. And again, there was a demographer on board. It represents a lot of hard work. I think just Devotion is going to be a wonderful school at 1,010 elementary students, and the 1,040 includes the preschool.
Yes.
It will be a wonderful school, but we've already, essentially crammed the equivalent of Lawrence and Baker into our existing buildings at 8 schools, it just only makes sense to spread it out and not pack all the buildings even more full.
Thank you, David. And then beginning with you, how does the budget for this school, meaning Baldwin, I'm assuming, compare to other potential sites considered?
In the cost estimates that were included in the final report of the 3-site study that was also done by JLA, Jonathan Levy Architects, over the summer, the Baldwin was the least costly option, and then the Baker site was a step above, and the Stop and Shop site was considerably higher. So it was the least costly of the 3, and the current cost estimate, I think it's $83.5 million. I mean, again, we're early, but that's the number, which is, I think, a little bit lower than the range that was estimated in the summer.
Thank you. Janice?
So my understanding is that the estimate for Baldwin is not really looking at life cycle costs. It doesn't include, for instance, the amount of transportation costs, busing that will be required for the next 60 years. It doesn't include the fact that there are no continuous walkable sidewalks in the area, so there is a huge amount of infrastructure that's going to have to be built, which is going to be millions of dollars. I don't know how many millions of dollars, but certainly at least $5, maybe $10 million to create these ADA compliant sidewalks, which don't exist. There are, in fact, utility poles in the middle of the few sidewalks that do exist along Heath Street, and to move them would require taking land by abutters by eminent domain. There's no place to put those poles otherwise. And so really the costs for this project are going to go up significantly, as we go forward. So I think 83 is optimistic. I think it's going to be quite significantly above that.
Thank you. And then Janice, beginning with you, do you know is there an estimated cost of transportation to bus students from other places to Baldwin?
I think it depends on the number of buses that will ultimately be needed. And I had those figures. I don't have them with me, but I think it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year in busing. Plus, we also pay for vans to pull people there, although that's happening at the schools right now. But these would be new buses. They'd have to come 3 times a day, not just once or twice, because of after-school activities where they'd have to be taken to other places, picked up elsewhere.
David, would you care to comment on that question?
Yes, please. So as I suggested earlier, unless we build 2 ninth schools and double the $83 million capital cost, we're going to have transportation costs wherever we build the 9th school. So it's not unique to that's not a cost that's unique to the Baldwin site. And that I'm fairly confident that there's $1 million that's actually carried in the $83.5 million. There was a number that was provided in discussion with the transportation department to do the sidewalk improvements that are in the recommendation from the traffic consultant. So there's actually is a number for those off-site improvements that came through consultation with the town's transportation department. I'm fairly confident of that.
All right, thank you. And David, what is the projected school enrollment from the reduced Hancock Village?
From the Hancock Village 1 and 2, the most recent apartment numbers that were in an agreement several months ago. Ben, do you know it's over 100 elementary school children? 129 elementary school children from the additional construction at Hancock Village, and those are along with all the other known developments, are part of that green line map?
Janice?
Yes, another, maybe Ben has this figure too, and how many, what is the overage at Baker right now? How many students would you say it's over the capacity right now? Something like 70 students?
I don't understand the.
Yeah, that it's, you know, that it's considered overcrowded by how many students? Something like 70?
It was originally designed, so all the course space are designed for 3 sections. It's now 4 sections plus 3 additional sections. So, I mean, in terms of, it's over capacity now, it's over by,
I think,
100
no, it's not. It's more like 70. So we're talking maybe a need for finding 15 additional classrooms at Baker is what you would need to bring it into scale, in my view.
All right. Janice, how would well, I'm not sure this is really for you. David, perhaps we'll start with you on this one. How would the video be affected by the National Park Service Article 97 legal issues?
So I'm not a lawyer, but even in the question, and I don't want to go down some merry path of talking about all this legalese, but Article 97 is the state law that the Sewell recreation property is under Article 97. So the Baldwin School, to my knowledge, there aren't Article 97 issues related to this school, but there are federal, not state, similar issues, and that's the Federal Land and Water Conservation Act. And the town received a grant of $23,000 in 1976, half of which was spent to pave this tennis court, which is in the light green square, and the other half of which was used to pave the tennis courts at Lawrence School in 1976. And so the uncertainty is whether that grant meant that the tennis court property, which is not being built on here, is the only thing that pretty much there's general agreement that that's constrained and can't be built on, having taken that grant. That was the contract with the Park Service, federal. But now a question has been raised by an email from someone at the National Park Service who said that it is her interpretation that not only is the tennis court constrained, but so is that space to the right of it. So that's the issue that needs to be investigated and learned more about.
So unfortunately, I did not bring my slide, but I did bring a picture. So for those who can see this, but maybe go back to the drawing where it's the 3 sections, and I'll show you what can't be built, according to the National Park Service. No, the one where you show the 3, no.
The building?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
This is gone. It goes down to, so only the top 2 sections. So I have this here. So this is what's left when you have the National Park Service. It essentially takes away half, almost half, a little less than half of the Baldwin site. So the Baldwin site is 2.6 acres approximately. This would take off at least 1.25 of those acres. And so you see what you would be left with is only the top 2 parts of that site. So if you can continue that dotted line across, pretty much, is what is restricted by the federal grant.
So I would simply say that these are open to interpretations. There is an email from a member of the Park Service who says, who asserts that, but it is school property, and there is a map that's part of the grant that draws a very heavy line only around the tennis courts, called the 6F map. So lawyers are going to have to work on this. That's all.
Shall we move to closing statements? So we ready? Oh, looks like we've got a couple of hands that didn't come up in the questions. Okay, I'm going to, given the time, I'm going to limit this a little bit, but the 2 of you, let's go ahead. So please here.
Actually, Kate Collerman. David, you avoided the actual question of answering. If Baldwin doesn't go forward, how do we avoid going through the whole process?
I don't know. We're all in this together.
So why can't we just go back to one of the favorite other choice?
Well, we don't know that, I mean, so this,
If you don't get funding, right? If it's killed, what happens?
then
Crowded schools.
certainly we've got a lot of crowded schools, right?
Honestly, what would have to happen? Why can't you guys get, I mean, the school committee and the selectmen say, okay, that didn't work. We went through all this process. Baker was the second choice. Go to Baker.
And that's one of the possibilities. So, but will that happen?
Well, if it does happen, please do that.
Thank you, and I think we have one more.
I just want a clarification, please, on the transportation cost. You may not have the exact dollar figure, but what is the estimated per year cost of those 3 trips a day to bus kids in and out of the Walden site?
I don't know those numbers.
I can answer that question a little bit. Right now, we use 4 buses to service 8 schools. This school alone will need at least 4 buses. So whatever we pay in the town now will at least double. And one estimate I heard, although I haven't costed it out, could be as high as $500,000 a year for busing.
Okay, we had 2 hands back here and one over here, and I think I am going to keep the discussion going a little bit. You first? He had his hand up before you.
So just, maybe I'm just not knowing of the context, but it sounds like there's a reason maybe that expansion in place at Baker didn't happen. Is there any sort of context? Because if it was looked at very heavily, and it seems that a lot of people in the room are very supportive of it, it sounds like the people in the room that have been supportive of it so far don't actually live in the precincts that votes at Baker. So did those residents oppose it? I feel like I'm missing something. I feel like I'm missing.
I can add a little bit of context to your question. The addition that was built at Baker was quite some time ago, before we actually, before B-Space, before we actually did the expand in place that went in other schools. And at that time, Baker was seen to be a small, when my kids went there, it was a 400-student school. So it was a small school. It's the size that Heath is now. And I think they
Smaller.
smaller than Heath is now, according to Dave. So, but it was a small school, and you know, so when it was expanded, all they did was add 6 classrooms, thinking that's all they needed. I don't think Baker ever seriously looked at expansion possibilities in today's world. I think that's very old, and I think it's worth a conversation. I do.
David, care to comment?
So they're really, we're talking about 2 totally separate ideas at Baker. When we were, the site evaluation over of the 3 sites, Stop and Shop, Baker, and Baldwin, was looking at how to build a 9th elementary school, because we need a 9th elementary school. That's so much more than adding classrooms, adding a few more classrooms at Baker. It wasn't comparing building a school at Baldwin with building a classroom wing at Baker. And on balance, looking at all of the different parameters, including the concerns about overuse of the outdoor space at Baker with 2 schools, sharing the outdoor facilities that are there now, and even taking up space with the 2nd school. That was one of the main considerations why this site, I mean, again, there were 9 and 5, whatever that, 14 people voting in that whole calculus. So the decision was between building a 9th school at Baker versus Stop and Shop versus building a 9th school here, and not doing more expand in place, because it just doesn't meet the need.
We're just going to move on and make room for the next question. Thank you very much. Arthur.
When you talk about buses, is it rental, or do we own the buses? And what's the case with the 4 buses at other schools right now?
I can answer that question. Ben can answer the question. He's the school
They're
department. They're leased, yeah.
They would be?
And yeah, I mean, I don't know that specifically, but I would assume that.
Yeah.
I would assume that from this conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, over here.
Thank you. David, I'm going to direct this to you. I think any objective person listening to this conversation this evening would probably agree that the Baldwin School proposal is trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. And it really is just not clear. You know, they say Willie Sutton robbed banks because that's where the money was. And if the kids are in the Baker School area and more kids will be coming to the Baker School area, and sure there are kids in the Baldwin School area, but not as many, it's just really not clear why this gentleman in the back said there must be some other agenda going on. I have to say, we're trying to fit a round peg into a square hole. Why?
David, let's start with you since it was directed to you. You have 1 minute.
Well, it's a funny question. I don't agree with the premise.
You're allowed to argue with the premise.
I mean, there were 20 public meetings, lots of public input in the course of reviewing the three sites.
There were several votes, and you voted for Baker twice. So,
Well, you can read the record. The minutes are posted of what I said. If you'd like me to paraphrase myself, I can't quote myself from October. What I said was, I believe that we can do an excellent school at any of these three sites. But I felt as if I had a responsibility to point to one. And I said that. I said I feel as an architect on the board and everything that there's an expectation. And so, because I have been saying for years, give me a site so I can build a school because we need a school. And what I said was, I will vote for Baker because I see it as presenting the fewest impediments to execution. Not that it's the best site, but impediments to execution. We've now been through a very exhaustive traffic study, in which there are dueling traffic consultants, but in which the traffic consultant that the town hired believes that this can work. And I think that we have a school plan, and I think that the synergy between the park, the recreation facilities, and the school facilities, I think it's in a neighborhood that isn't served by a public school, and I think that's an advantage to the town. So I'm not sure if we will, once we understand the legal constraints, whether we will choose to and be able to move forward with this site, because we need that evaluation, which is what we're pausing to do right now. But I believe that in the future, that this will be a cherished facility for the community for both Chestnut Hill and for all of Brookline.
Janice.
Which doesn't mean that I'm committed to doing it. I'm committed to finding the right path for the town.
Thank you, David. Janice?
So I believe that if the town believes that there is a pressing need for a school now, that this doesn't meet that bar. It will take, even just with no legal action, just the legal process for converting land will take years. That's what happens. And I think that, I also think that somebody asked about why there was, okay. So yes, there were 20 meetings, absolutely correct. But there's no parent community right now at Baldwin. So the meetings were held at Baker, yes. The meetings were held at Pierce, yes. But this community was never totally engaged, and so there weren't a lot of people rattling and saying, no, this isn't the right site. So blame the community for not speaking up. But honestly, we as a community, if we want to move forward, it's important to pick a site that is viable now.
So I think we're safe now to move on to closing statements. And Sorry, I need to check. I know you're going to have 2 minutes each. And I believe we start with Con.
Yes. So actually, I don't need 2 minutes. I think I've talked a lot already. I just want to talk about the 1.5 million. The 1.5 million is to move forward with the design that Mr. Pollock showed. It is a beautiful design. That's true. But really what the 1.5 million should be about is building a school that can be built. And so the question really is, can the school be built on this site in a timely and cost-effective way? And from much of the information that's come, in fact, in recent weeks, the memo from Aaron Galantine is just within the last few weeks. We are just really learning all the impediments to this site. But even just knowing as much as we do, it's really clear that this is not the site to build a school if we believe that we need something built now. And so if that's the case, then we need to find a different solution to meeting classroom capacity needs on a town-wide basis. And I would urge town meeting members who are in the audience and at home to vote no action. Thank you.
So I think it is good to bring it home to what's before town meeting. I'm hoping that we can get out of there in 3 nights next week. The recommendation, there are at the moment different recommendations that are going to come to town meeting. You don't even have them yet because they've been moving all the time. Neil Wyszynski and the folks in advisory have been working night and day to try to work together to bring a coherent recommendation. But in both cases, you're going to get a recommendation to actually appropriate the $1.5 million with conditions that that there be a careful and thorough look at whether this is prudent to move forward with this school. And that's the recommendation that you're going to get. There is no recommendation, as far as I know, from either body of no action. It's really slight differences in terms of how, essentially both of them are going to say that the money should be put forward because this is legal issues. And just as an aside, what we know is that lawyers who've been hired to oppose the project have thrown up a whole lot of things that they want everybody to be very concerned about. But the whole point of the hiring expert counsel to advise the Board of Selectmen and the school committee is to assess those and find out which ones are real and which ones aren't and what the time issues are. And that's going to be done. It's going to be done in executive session because that's the only way to do it prudently. And then there's a whole process which is slightly different. You'll have to read the two recommendations about then how it gets going. But the main difference is that the advisory committee is asking that after all of that deliberation, there be a special town meeting if it's sooner than November, and then come back to town meeting in a special town meeting versus the Board of Selectmen is saying leave the decision with the Board of Selectmen and with the school committee. So that's the difference between the two recommendations.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you both very much.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
all of you as well.
You're right, David. There is no action for no action. It's just my own personal.
No, I know. That's you're going to have a dissenting recommendation.
All the presenters for a very rich and productive discussion. I think that we will give a closing remark just to make sure I can stay too long. Thank you all. Have a good evening.